Hello, hello. Welcome to the Use Your Nervous System to Stop Binge Eating Masterclass. I am so glad you have joined me, whether you are here with me live or if you are listening to the replay. I am glad you are here, and it is my goal to provide you with some new information today. I sincerely hope that you take something away from this masterclass that you can start putting into your life right away, and that you might hear something either brand new, something that you never knew before, or perhaps that you hear something in a different way today that helps you understand how it makes sense and how this can apply to your very specific journey. So let's go ahead and dive in. I am going to share my screen here and we will get started. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. All right. Okay, so use your nervous system to stop binge eating. In this masterclass, I'm going to teach you how to use your nervous system to stop binge eating. And so by the end of our time together, you will understand what your nervous system is and, more importantly, how to work with it so that you can end your binge eating for good. What I would love for you to do right now is just set your intention. Think about, why did you come to this class? What is the purpose? Set your intention for what you want to get out of this masterclass so that your brain can go to work on creating that result for yourself. Our brain has so many inputs. If we set our intention, you will be putting your brain to work on what you want it to get out of this class. So go ahead and do that. And I'm going to give you just an agenda so you know what you can expect in our time together. I'm going to give you a really quick introduction of myself for those of you who do not know me. We're going to dive right into the teaching, and then I'm going to extend an invitation for you. And then I've got a big announcement. So definitely you want to stay around to the end to hear the announcement. And then I will answer any questions. So anytime, for those of you who are attending live, if at any time during this class you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A. And at the end, I will go through and answer any questions you may have. You do not need to wait till the end to type your questions in, but that is when I will answer them. So just know that that will be available to you. So a little bit about my story. So I had my very first binge in college. It was actually on a box of Halloween candy, my first year, my first semester in college. And I continued to binge for over 25 years. I tried all the things: therapy, the books, 2 rounds of intensive outpatient treatment at an eating disorders treatment center, courses, you name it, I tried it. And for me, there were 2 missing pieces through all of that that really just kind of kept me in the cycle. I would have periods of success, and then I would just go right back into these longer extended times of binging. And for me, it was safety and trust. And the safety piece, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I didn't realize it. But now when I look back, I just think, oh, it makes so much sense. I did not understand just how much I was not experiencing safety in myself, both with myself in my body, and really even safety with certain foods. So those were really missing pieces for me. And now that's really a lot of the work that I do in helping other people who really struggle with binge eating is there's a lot around safety and trust. So my approach, it's rooted in science, it's trauma informed, and full of compassion. And I find that to be so important because many of us who have a history of binging, we may be very compassionate to everybody else, but that compassion with ourselves is often limited, if not non-existent. So that compassion is such an important part. And a little fun fact about me, in the month of October, I competed in 2 World Championship triathlon events, both the Ironman distance and the half Ironman distance. So this picture that you see here is me running in Kona, Hawaii on October 6th. So that's something that I love to do when I'm not coaching other people. So that is my story, but let's dive in. You are here to learn about your nervous system. So this is going to be an informational overview. I'm going to give you just enough science for context, but I'm going to use minimal terminology. You will hear in the beginning, I am going to use some terminology, but I'm not going to get super sciencey on you, and I'm not going to use a whole lot of terminology, because what I want to do is I want to make this easy to consume and to understand with maximum impact. You don't have to know all the terms and all the lingo in order for this to have a very big impact on you. Now, I'm also really only going to scratch the surface. You could take an entire course on the nervous system. Some of these concepts that I'm going to teach you, you could do such a much bigger, deeper dive into it, which is a lot of the work that I actually do with my clients. But I want to give you just enough information for you to understand your nervous system, to be able to identify certain things and to start to be able to work with it. This was one of the foundational missing pieces for me. And so I love talking about it, and I love sharing this information with other people. All right, so what is the nervous system anyway? In basic terms, the nervous system is it's the communication between your brain and your body. It's essentially your body's command center, and it regulates your organs, your movements, your thoughts, your automatic responses, and it runs in the background. It's always running. We don't have to do anything about it. It's always running. But our nervous system literally is the connection between our brain and our body. So why does it matter? Your nervous system creates your experience of life. This is huge. It creates your experience of life. Now, many people unknowingly have a dysregulated nervous system. And as we get into this a little bit more, I'll talk about what it means to have a dysregulated nervous system. But many people unknowingly have one, which impacts your experience of life. Understanding your nervous system helps you understand why you do what you do. And I find that when you can understand that, you can start to see yourself and you can start to see your behavior in a completely new way. So for me, I always just thought that I did this terrible thing. I hate that I binged. I wanted to stop, but I didn't understand why. And when I could actually understand, like, oh, that makes sense, I could start seeing it from a different perspective, start seeing myself in a different way, and then approaching what I was doing, the approach became different. I was no longer just focusing on the food and what I should eat and what I shouldn't eat, and eat this and don't eat that, and pulling these foods out of my diet. It wasn't that anymore. It was, oh, it's my nervous system. Then I could work with my nervous system to then allow the behaviors from the food with the binging to resolve themselves. And this is what I'm saying here in this last point. When you learn to work with your nervous system, you can naturally unwind that desire to binge that comes from an attempt to regulate yourself. So when your nervous system is dysregulated, which I'll get into when we get a little bit farther in, we have this desire to regulate, and that can be where the binging comes through. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the brain. Again, very basics. Your brain has one primary job: to stay alive. This is its primary job, and when that job is at risk, it is the only thing that matters: stay alive. Now, after its primary objective of staying alive, then the motivational triad kicks in, and that is the desire to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and use as little energy as possible. And this is all so that it can stay alive. These are the brain's primary functions. When the brain senses a threat, all of the resources of the body, the brain, the nervous system go to survival because it has that very number one job, stay alive. This is important. Well, we're going to come back to this in a minute. This has a direct impact on your nervous system. So just remember this, the brain's job, it's to stay alive. When the brain senses a threat, all resources go to survival, okay? All right, so when we talk about the nervous system, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are primarily related to polyvagal theory. I'm just going to give you this term. I'm going to give you a couple of names. If you want to do more research, you certainly can. You don't have to. You don't have to dive any deeper into this than what I'm about to teach you. But Stephen Porges is essentially the person behind polyvagal theory. And then there's Dan Siegel, who he coined the phrase window of tolerance, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So Stephen Porges and Dan Siegel are really kind of two of the primary people behind some of these teachings. And what polyvagal theory talks about is the vagus nerve, which essentially runs from your brain down into your to your body. He talks about how that nerve relates to our ability to connect and to relate to each other. We've got three general states of our nervous system. And again, I'm going very basic here. So for those of you who may know more about the details, this is very simplified, but sympathetic, ventral, and dorsal. And on the next page, I'm going to show you a diagram where you can really see these three phases and what I'm going to be talking about. But ventral is the place in the middle of our nervous system. It's the place where we feel very grounded, very at home. It is what Dan Siegel refers to as the window of tolerance, which is basically, as he refers to it, it's where we can tolerate various different emotions. We can tolerate when things maybe are going a little bit differently than we planned. We are just more able to tolerate different emotions, for example, within the window of tolerance. I like to call the ventral state of our nervous system, I like to call it home base. Home base to me is just that where you feel at home, where you feel very grounded, you feel very connected, you are able to have conversations with other people, you are able to make progress towards your goals, you are able to have some experiences where maybe you feel a little bit of fear, of doubt, of uncertainty, of frustration. You feel some of that, but you're still able to continue on in a way that is in alignment with where you want to go and the goals that you want to set for yourself. That's kind of like what I call it, home base. You can kind of think about your nervous system as like your internal thermostat, and home base is that place where you're most comfortable. So you can consider maybe it's in between like 68 and 72 degrees. If you're somebody who sets your thermostat at home and you know what, I'm pretty comfortable between 68 and 72. If it gets much colder than that, then I need to go get a jacket. If it gets much warmer, then maybe I need to shed some layers. But in those ranges, like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I might be a little chilly, I might be a little warm, but I know I can handle it. That's kind of what I like to visualize as that kind of grounded home base type of place. Now, on this next slide, this is going to give you just a visual of the nervous system, the three primary states of your nervous system, and how they kind of relate to each other. So where we've got home base, where we talked about, this is the ventral place of your nervous system. This is where your brain very much feels safe. This is the sense of safety. Dan Siegel also calls this the window of tolerance. When you are here in home base, in your 68 to 72 degree range, you might be feeling calm, grounded, settled, focused, connected. This is a place where we can often get a lot done. Maybe we have new ideas. Maybe we feel creative. That happens at home base. Now, what can happen, we talked about before, remember, the brain's job is to survive. If the brain senses any threat of safety, it can go into one of two survival responses. We've all heard of fight or flight, and we've heard of freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. So what happens is the fight or flight response happens within the sympathetic nervous system, where we are highly activated. I like to think about these as the amount of energy that is kind of flowing through ourselves and through our nervous system. So when we are above home base, we're in that fight or flight state, there's a lot of excess energy in our body. And this might feel like worry, anxiety, overwhelm, doubt, uncertainty. You kind of can think about when you feel these things, sometimes the amount of energy that can kind of be coursing through your body, you can almost feel it sometimes. And that excess energy can be that fight or flight. So you hear the fight or flight. The fight can be, some people have a tendency to go towards anger, right? Maybe they will just snap at somebody. Maybe they will, it will come out more as anger. That's more of the fight response. The flight response is more when you kind of are trying to escape something. So that can be binging. It is a perfect example of the flight response. It can be binging. It can be overworking. It can be social media, it can be shopping, it can be drinking, it can be any of those things where you're kind of trying to escape your current situation by going into something else. And it's because we have this really high level of energy. Okay, now when you're below home base, there's low energy. There's not enough energy there. And this is also called the dorsal state of your nervous system. But this is another survival response. It's that freeze response. And this can look like hopelessness, despair, depression, lethargy. When you feel these things where it's just like, I don't even care, it can feel very heavy, just that the energy is almost drained out of you. This is also a survival response. So here's what's important to remember. When you are above home base, you're in that very highly energetic place, or when you're below home base and when you're in that place of very low energy, you are in a survival response. Now, if you remember the previous slide, when we were talking about the brain, when you're in a survival response, there are no resources available for the other parts of your brain. Now, we have what's called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the thinking part of your brain. It's the logic part of your brain. It's the part that sets goals, that says, let's go do these things, that is willing to go through some pain and some discomfort to get to what might be on the other side. However, when you are in a survival response, you do not always have access to your thinking brain. This is why sometimes you may end up binging and not even realizing it. It's like, wait a second, I had a plan, I was going to do this thing, and it's like, where was that part of me, that part of you that is able to set goals, that is able to do things, that is very smart and very smart, and is able to accomplish other things. When you are in a survival response, that part of your brain, that prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of your brain, may not even be accessible in that moment, especially if you are constantly in that above home base state. The more you're up there, the more you're in that survival response, or below. It's kind of like, you can imagine, if you're above and you're in that very high energy place, just think about a car that's just revving. The engine is just revving all of the time. Well, we all know what's going to happen to that car, right? It is not going to function effectively. It is ultimately going to probably burn out in some way, shape, or fashion because the engine is not designed to take that much revving over and over again. Our body is the same way. So when we spend a lot of time in that super high energy place, then we end up kind of like revving ourselves. And our brain learns, it's like, wait, I've got too much energy here. I need to drain this energy. So our brain figures out, often for many of us at a very young age, our brain figures out, oh, you know what? If we do these things, this will drain the energy. So we figure out that food helps to drain the energy. But here's what happens. Often we eat, but we keep eating, and it does bring us into home base, but it brings us all the way down. Then we're below home base. Then we are in that dorsal state where we aren't doing anything, which is also a survival state. So then we're down there and we kind of flow back and forth between all the way below or all the way above. And we don't spend a lot of time in home base itself. So just understanding this concept, this is the nervous system. When you're above, you have excess energy, you're in a survival response. It's that fight or flight place. When you're below, you have very low energy, but it's also a survival place, which is why sometimes both of them kind of feel hard to get out of, because sometimes we're trying to use our thinking brain, but guess what? Our thinking brain's not even on board. Where you want to use your thinking brain and where your thinking brain truly is the most effective is in home base. Does that make sense? So when you're in home base, you have more access to the cognitive part of your brain. Then you can use that to make your plans and to figure out how this makes sense, to figure out what happened, maybe the last time you binged, maybe to journal about it. If anybody tells you to sit down and journal right after a binge, probably not going to happen, because you probably are either, you may still be in fight or flight, but my guess is right after a binge, you're going to be below, you're going to be in that super low energy survival place. There's probably not going to be a lot available to you. Now, the more you access the different parts and the more you're able to kind of not fully go into pure survival mode, the more access you will have to your thinking brain, that you will be able to get there ultimately. But if you're in a period of high binging time, don't think or don't even expect yourself to have the thinking part of your brain on board either while you're binging or right after you're binging. That's more of that survival place. But when you know that you're back in that home place base, that grounded place, that's the time to get curious, to kind of start figuring out what might have been going on for you. Now, here's something else I want to tell you about the nervous system. Each individual, the amount of time they spend in any one of these is going to vary. It's going to vary based upon your past. It's going to vary based upon just your experience, your upbringing, what you was modeled and taught to you, but it can change. Your nervous system can absolutely change. What you want to be able to do, this home base, the way I have drawn this on this graph here is that they're equal. You've got kind of a third, a third, a third. Home base, you're in home base a third of the time, you're above home base a third of the time, you're below home base a third of the time. No, this is not anybody's experience. Everybody is going to have kind of a different percentage of how and when they spend within each of these areas. There is no right or wrong way to be. There is no right or wrong nervous system to have. It's just knowing this is my nervous system and knowing this can change. Ideally, what you want to be able to do is to increase your window of tolerance, to increase your home base. And what that does is when you increase your window of tolerance, so maybe right now you have a very narrow window in which you are, able to kind of access that rational part of your brain where you kind of feel focused and connected. And it doesn't take much at all to send you right above and to send you into worry, anxiety, overwhelm, and doubt. But what we can do is through working with your nervous system, you can actually increase your home base. You increase your window of tolerance. And what's amazing about that is as you increase your window of tolerance, you're able to experience some doubt, some worry, some uncertainty without putting yourself into survival response. You're increasing your capacity to be with certain emotions that right now you might just immediately feel threatened. Your brain feels threatened by and goes straight into that survival response. The more we create safety with ourselves, the larger our window of tolerance grows, so that we only end up getting way above or way below home base when it becomes more of a significant experience or perception from our brain of threat. And every single person, no matter what is going on for you, every single person is constantly going to be going in and out of home base. So it's not even a goal to be in home base all the time. That's always going to change. But what we don't want, and where I talked about before, I talked about a dysregulated nervous system. So a dysregulated nervous system happens when you get stuck. Let's say you're just constantly in worry, anxiety, overwhelm, or doubt or uncertainty. You're just constantly up there and you just feel like you're stuck up there. You spend a lot of your time up there. Or if you're not up there, you either then binge and you come all the way back down below, but you kind of like, you don't really spend much time in home base. You're kind of dysregulated, means there's a whole lot of time spent either above or below home base, so that you don't really have access to that more cognitive, grounded, connected part of you. But what's amazing is, again, this can absolutely change. So that is the description of the nervous system. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A and I will cover them at the end. Okay, so here is an important thing. The state of your nervous system, it's based on your brain's perception of safety. Now, this is important. It's your brain's perception of safety. This doesn't mean that it is the actual safety. It's your brain's perception. Now, why is this important? It's important because your brain's perception of safety is going to be based upon a number of things. And I want to touch very briefly on trauma and how trauma impacts the nervous system. And so we're going to start by just a super generalized definition of trauma, which is a person's emotional response to a distressing experience. Every human has experiences of trauma, and it's all based upon their response to the experience. So two people could go through the exact same experience and have a very different response because their brain had a very different perception of what was going on at the time. So I remember learning about trauma and learning about what was called big T trauma and little t trauma. So if you've heard about this before, big T trauma is essentially what a lot of people might think of when they hear the word trauma. So maybe it's an accident, maybe it's death, maybe it is sexual abuse, verbal abuse, those types of, kind of big T, kind of the quote unquote big things that might happen to somebody in life. The little t trauma would then be referred to as maybe it is like something like being bullied in school, or maybe it is not having some of your emotional needs met, something like that. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. Big T trauma, little t trauma, it doesn't matter. What matters is what your brain perceived of that experience at the time. So the brain kind of creates these connections and these associations following trauma, and it leads different people to different reactions to the same person, place, or event. So essentially the same thing could happen to two people. You're going to have different perception. And what really matters, it doesn't really even matter what happened if somebody was truly at risk or if somebody was safety was truly impaired or not. All that matters and what's really very true is what the brain perceived of that situation. That created then the trauma experience. I love this quote. It's from Bessel van der Kolk. He has several books, but one book that he has that is amazing is called The Body Keeps the Score. And this quote says, after trauma, the world is experienced with a different nervous system that has an altered perception of risk and safety. So what this means is that our nervous system, with every single thing that happens, our nervous system is impacted. And our nervous system has a new perception of what is risk and what is safety. Now, again, this can be changed and we can recreate safety. But if something happened for you in the past where safety was not present, or safety, there is a perception that safety is not present, what's so important is to be able to learn how to create that safety. Many of us end up making the association that food is safe, that food kind of is that response when we feel unsafe. Food provides that safety. That is a connection that we made many, many years ago. And so part of it is really understanding and working on different ways to create safety so that the food isn't needed anymore. It's not trying to take away. And this is what happens so many times where it can be so challenging for people is food became the safety. And then we go to these programs, we go to these whatever, we get on these diets that tell us you have to stop eating these foods. And it's basically taking away your brain's perception of safety. Well, then of course you're going to go opposite to that. And of course, then you're going to want more of it. And if it feels as though what has been a sense of safety for you, if that becomes at risk, then it's almost a double safety. It's like a double safety threat to safety. So here's something else that's really important about your nervous system. When I talk about the different states of your nervous system, home base, being above home base, being below home base, whether you are, whichever state you're in, it is your state of your nervous system. It is not you. That is not you personally. It is just the state of your nervous system. So each of us has a state where we're more comfortable, and it's based on our past and our upbringing. And for many of us, that may be above home base, that kind of revved up, very buzzy place. Or it may be below. You may be more comfortable, checked out, doing nothing in life, on the couch. You may be more comfortable being in home base, but I'm going to guess if you are somebody who is binging on a regular basis, it's likely you are more comfortable in the being above or below home base. But we can learn how to change it. We can learn how to change our state and how to increase that window of tolerance like I talked about before. And what's so powerful is then we can recognize when we're in that survival response and then develop tools to calm the nervous system. When you realize, oh, this is my nervous system, you can respond in that way. Okay, so how does this relate to binging? I've already referred to several things just as I have been talking to you, but let's go ahead and just like really clarify how this makes sense. So at some point, you discovered that binging would bring down that energy, that survival energy. If you are in that above home base place and you're in that like anxiety, worry, overwhelm, stress, you discovered at some point that would bring it down. It's brilliant. It is an absolute brilliant strategy. However, it's not so brilliant because it takes you all the way down. It'll take you below home base to the freeze place. And then you stay there and you end up kind of going up and down between the two. But when your brain made this connection, if you think about it, it was so protective. It made so much sense. Your brain is essentially trying to prevent you from your engine exploding, from revving your car too much. So when you eat food to bring down and to drain that energy, you often end up eating so much food it takes you below, so you're in that shutdown state. Now, here's what's super interesting is a lot of times, especially for bingers, there is this experience of shame after a binge. And shame comes from thinking, I am broken. There is something wrong with me. Now, what's interesting about the emotion of shame is that it has both an activation energy. So it has like a lot of it, shame can kind of have this, it's got a lot of, it is a very buzzy, activating energy in your body that makes you kind of want to hide and to get away from it. But shame also has shutdown energy, and it may, again, making you want to hide. So it's like at the same time we want to hide, but we also want to get away from it or just get away from that experience. So shame is one of, if not the only emotion that has both very high energy and very low energy. So the emotions that I described before on the visual, the worry, anxiety, overwhelm, those all have that high energy. Then you have the depression, the lethargy, hopelessness, despair, low energy. Shame is super interesting because it wants to kind of be in both places. So sometimes it can almost even hop back and forth between. It is absolutely creates that survival response, but it is unique in that it both has high energy and that really low energy. And if you missed I actually did a great masterclass on shame and kind of the importance of really understanding and working with shame in it to get over and to stop binge eating. So if you would like a copy of that masterclass, just send me an email or a message and let me know, and I'll be sure to get that replay to you. So the other thing that's so important is that you can recognize what's happening, recognize this as your nervous system, and then you can develop new responses and new connections when you start noticing yourself going to that place, seeing that you're getting above the window, going above home base. You can start to see it and recognize and develop a new response rather than going to the pantry or to the store or to the drive-through. And then you don't see yourself as broken anymore. And this is so important because when you don't see yourself as broken and you realize, oh, this is my nervous system. Oh, it makes sense. I can work with this. Then you are more able to then work with yourself. When you see yourself as broken, you kind of end up getting yourself stuck in that freeze place of hopelessness and despair. Because if you're broken, what are you going to do about it? But when you can realize, oh, I see, now I can approach this in a different way than I have before. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? We have now learned a lot. Now what? What do I do? So the first thing I want you to do is learn how to recognize your various states. So how do they feel and what do you notice? So what I would really encourage you to do is just get curious. You can check in with yourself multiple times a day and just kind of ask yourself right now, as you are listening to this masterclass, what state do you think you're in? Do you think you're in home base? Do you think you're above home base? Do you think you're below home base? I will give you some hints. If you are able to, if you're kind of like having some like pings, some ideas, some insights, some ahas, you are in home base. How do I know that? Because your thinking brain is on board. You're able to be focused, connected, you're able to learn, you're able to think about how this might be able to apply to you. If you are feeling like, oh my God, can't you just get on with it? When is this going to be over? It's time for dinner. I've got to do this. I've got a million things going on. I can barely, maybe you're only hearing every fifth word that I say. You are probably above home base. You may get something out of this, But depending on where you are above home base, it's likely that you're probably in more of an activation response. And while you may be listening, you may or may not get a lot out of it. Although maybe just listening to this, you're like, oh, that's me. And that's all you needed to get out of this class. Or you decide, you know what, that's totally me. She nailed me. I am going to listen again when I'm in more of a grounded place, and then I'm gonna see what else I can get out of this. If you are like checked out, scrolling your phone, maybe you're like looking at Instagram ads while you're listening to this, or you're like watching Netflix and listening to this at the same time, or just totally checked out, you are probably below home base. But what you can know is just get curious. How does this feel in my body? What do I notice? What do I notice? Generally, I find that people, just the idea of how much energy is kind of in your body, you can notice that. If you kind of have that, the amount of energy that feels kind of like grounded and focused, it might be a whole lot of excess energy, or it might be kind of heavy, low energy. Just start to get curious and recognize what state you're in. You can also start to get curious about how much time you generally spend in each state. Now, when you binge, can you look back and see what was the state of my nervous system before I binged and after I binged? So ask yourself right now, if you can remember the last time you binged, ask yourself, okay, let me just go back. What was the state of my nervous system before? How do I know? Was I above home base? What was I either feeling or thinking, or what was going on for me? What about after? Did I go all the way down? Was then I below home base? Just get curious to see if you can even just become aware and identify those different states. You've just got the 3 states: home base, above, and below. And it's all just based on the amount of energy that is flowing through yourself. Now, as you recognize it, can you catch it sooner? So sometimes you might not even recognize that you're above home base until you're like, ready to pop your lid. But what can be beautiful is the energy generally builds. It builds up, 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 up. And then at some point when our brain decides like, we cannot take anymore, we're going to hit our limit, then we end up going to the food when it gets to that place. But if you can start to notice that your energy is increasing, and you can catch it sooner, a lot of times you can actually catch it before you need to go to the food, and you get into that pure survival state where the brain is not going to have access to the logical part that's like, hey, maybe we got a little excess energy we need to deal with right now. So the goal is not always to be in home base. It's to be able to move in and out of your various states without getting stuck in the survival response. We are all going to have times above home base. We are all going to have times below home base, but we want it to be more of a fluid process and to increase our capacity of home base at all times. The more we can increase that, as we increase our home base, by default, our above home base and our area below home base are going to get smaller, which is great because then we will spend less time there. Okay, so what do I do? Now that you're telling me all of this, if I recognize it, then what do I do? What do I do when I'm above home base? It's all going to be, remember, it's about the amount of energy flowing through your system. So when you're above home base, you got a lot of energy. So it naturally makes sense that we want to do things that are going to help us drain our energy. So I'm going to give you a couple of slides here to tell you, and then I'm going to show you the visual again with the tools on it, just for anybody who might be a visual learner. So anything to drain that excess energy, you can even ask yourself, what would make sense for me? What would feel good? What would feel like a great way for me to drain any excess energy that I have right now? So one thing you can do is with breathing, you can take a deep breath, and with your deep breath, when you have a lot of energy, what you want to do is you want to take an inhale and you want your exhale to be longer than your inhale. So you can do 3 to 5 deep breaths with an extended exhale. You would be amazed at how powerful and impactful some simple breathing is. meditation is a great way to really kind of bring yourself down. Particularly, I do not recommend trying this if you have never done it before, but if you can get into a habit of meditation, or you have certain kind of little short ones that maybe you start practicing with and experimenting with while you're in home base, that then you listen to while you're above, that your brain kind of knows it can make that association with home base. And you might have to experiment with finding meditations that feel like they are calming or grounding to you. I personally love Insight Timer. It's a free app, but there are a zillion meditations out there. Anything to ground yourself. So if you think about, you have all of this excess energy, you can ground yourself. You can ground yourself to nature by taking a walk. I can look outside right now and look at some, certain trees or the grass or something to kind of connect myself to nature. You can also ground yourself to yourself. Putting your hand on your heart is such an incredible way to help drain energy. You can also ground yourself to others, and others could be people. So if you have people that are safe connections for you, pets are an amazing source of grounding for us, or stuffed animals. I have, in my adult life, I got a stuffed animal, a stuffed giraffe, and she is an amazing source of grounding, of connecting for me when I need to drain some energy. Now, if you're below home base, you have very, very low energy and you want to increase, basically you want to do anything to create more energy because you don't have very much energy. One thing you can do, you can still use breathing, but here with breathing, what you want to do is short, quick bursts. So when you have a lot of energy, you want your exhale to be longer. When you want to create energy, you actually want your breathing to be shorter, the exhale to be shorter. So it can be short, quick bursts of breath to kind of create more energy to flow through your body. Any sort of movement is amazing. You can dance. Sometimes you also might even want to, you might want to scream. You might want to hit a pillow. If you might want to laugh. You might want to, do something there to kind of create more energy. Cold water. Cold water can help kind of create some energy if you're kind of don't have very much. Cold water, or even just kind of like a light tapping of like the back of your hand, can also create more energy. Music is an amazing way to, especially if you kind of have your playlist or certain songs that will always kind of rev you up. So here's our visual again. And if you've got a lot of energy, deep breaths, meditation, grounding yourself, the screaming and the laughing and the dancing, those are actually really good to drain your energy. When you've got a lot of energy, and especially if you are somebody who is prone more to like that fight response, a kind of more anger, maybe you get upset with people, it can be really helpful to scream into a pillow, to just, or take a pillow and just, you might punch the pillow, you might throw, I've sometimes, another thing you could do is you can take a pool noodle and just bang that pool noodle on the bed or on something if you want to kind of like get some of that energy out. You might scream, you might want to cry. Now, I would only do these in the privacy of your own home and when it feels safe and you've got the space to do that. But being able to just get that energy out of you in some way. Sometimes you can do it in an active way like that. Sometimes you can do it through a more kind of passive internal way. And with whatever you are feeling and whatever your specific situation is, you will need to decide and figure out what works for you. What works for you may be totally different than what works for me or for the next person. When you're in home base, this is where you want to tune into yourself. Get really curious. Ask questions. This is where you want to make progress towards your goals. You want to get creative. You want to use that thinking brain. You can also just focus on being present, being with what is. You don't always have to be making progress. You don't always have to be doing something, but can you just be where you are? Maybe you are on vacation. Maybe you are just at home with your family and you are totally tuned in and you are connected. Can you just allow yourself fully to be where you are? Connecting with yourself and with others is such a beautiful thing that you can do while you're in home base. And then when you're below home base, those short, quick breaths, any sort of movement, cold water, and music are very helpful to kind of increase your energy. So just knowing where you are in your nervous system and knowing the various things that are probably going to be the most helpful to you when you're in those states, it's such a powerful way to understand and to work with your nervous system. I also want to share one last thing, which is in home base. It's called rest and digest, and it's called rest and digest for a reason. This is where our organs are, because we're not in survival mode, and the brain does not think that its one job of staying alive is at risk. Everything else is more active. So when the brain is in survival mode, some of the organs are going to shut down because the brain is going to put all of the energy and all of the focus on staying alive and to surviving. Now, what this means is a lot of times people who spend a lot of time in survival states have a lot of digestive issues because the stomach is one of those organs that gets shut down when it's in a survival state. So this home base area, this ventral area of your nervous system is called rest and digest because your body digests best when you are in home base. Your body rests best when you are in home base. If you can get yourself into home base before you go to sleep, your rest will be so much more impactful. If you can get yourself in home base before you eat, your digestion will be so much more impactful. Key tips. Okay, so what is my personal experience with all of this? I used to basically spend most of my time above home base. I did not realize this. I had no idea. I used to think, I didn't even think of myself as an anxious person. I think I don't even know what I thought about I thought a lot of negative things about myself, but I spent most of my life above home base, always doing, always needing to produce, to be the next, to kind of do the next thing. Lots of overwhelm. I would say overwhelm was probably the primary emotion for me. And so because then my brain was always going, I very much taught myself that binging was the way to slow down, to drain that energy. Then I would eat so much. It was the only time I would slow down. Then I would be all the way down at the bottom. And what was fascinating to me was once I discovered that this was going on, it took a while for me to kind of really put all of these pieces together. But now I recognize what's going on with my nervous system most of the time before it gets so high that I just feel like I'm going to pop my lid. I will kind of recognize when I'm getting towards the top of home base, like, ooh, I know my own personal signs, my own cues, and I know what I can do and what I need to do to drain some of that excess energy before it gets too intense. And I know that it's not me, it's the way that I'm wired, but I can rewire my brain. And over time, I have watched my home base get bigger, and I have watched my access to, I have more access to my thinking brain in those moments where I do go into more of that survival response. I don't have full access to it by any means, but I have more access than I used to because my window of tolerance is now bigger, and I have created more safety with myself around experiences and around some of those bigger emotions. So there still is a little bit of this sense of survival, but it's not this like, oh my gosh, where, this pure epic survival brain wanting to shut down mode. There's more access to the thinking part where there didn't used to be any access before at all. And so now it's just a passion of mine to help my clients learn this material, to learn about the nervous system, to recognize what's happening for them, to rewire what their connections are, to increase their home base so that the binging and the desire to use that binge to regulate, so that all of that can kind of dissipate on its own. When you are working on your own ways to drain your energy or to increase your energy, to manage all of that and to keep yourself in that home base as much as possible, or to be able to know how to work with yourself when you get out of home base, it is such an amazing and important part of this work. And so that's now what I love helping people do. Okay, so let's review. Your nervous system, it's your body's command center. It's always trying to keep you safe. You can learn to recognize your current state, whatever state you're in, and also to expand your home base. And you can develop the tools to bring yourself into home base that will truly honor your needs. The problem when we binge, yes, it is trying to help us, but it's not really honoring the needs that we have. So we can use these tools to truly honor our needs and to work with our nervous system. And it becomes this amazing balance of really honoring yourself, working with yourself while meeting yourself wherever you are and however your brain perceives the situation to be. Now, we have just scratched the surface. A pretty big scratch. I've given you a lot of information here, but it really is just the surface of some amazing information that truly can be life-changing when it comes to your own journey and binging and your relationship with that. So reflecting on the teaching, can you see, based on everything that you've learned in this class, can you see how your nervous system might be keeping you in that pattern of binging? And can you recognize where you may have wisely started eating to calm your activated nervous system? Are you starting to understand that you aren't broken? This is the number one thing I would love every person who binges to understand. You are not broken. And are you curious about what it would look like to work with me to create more internal safety? So we talked about this, the nervous system, it's all based on the brain's perception of safety. Some of that is internal safety. That internal safety, it's that brain's perception of what's safe and what's not safe. What's amazing is, again, this can be changed with time and with practice and with certain practices and tools. We can teach ourselves that perception of safety where the brain has perceived that things aren't safe. We can create safety where safety was not present before. And that's part of the work. So if you're curious about what this would look like, about how this would work for you specifically, about how I work with people on the nervous system, more specifically with my clients, I would love to invite you to book a food freedom session. And essentially what this is it's a call where you and I get on the phone and we can talk about any number of things, whether it is specifically talking about your nervous system. Maybe we talk about what you learned in this class today and how you specifically would want to apply it for you, certain tools that you might have. Maybe you want to share a situation or something with me where your brain might be creating, where maybe you see where your brain might have this perception that it's not safe or that something isn't safe and it's trying to use this food for safety. This is absolutely something we can talk about on the call. I often have people say to me, I just shared something with you that I have never told another soul. And I think what happens is I help create a sense of safety for my clients so that you can start talking about these things that have not felt safe to talk about before. And it's in the exploration and the getting curious about these things that we can start to examine and start to develop more trust and more safety that wasn't there. And when you have the trust and the safety, that's when the desire and the need to turn to the food for that safety, it just starts to unwind itself. So this call is it's a very low pressure call. It is just it's a discussion between you and me. And my goal for every call is for you to come away with understanding something, whether it is something new about yourself. I've often had people tell me after a call, like, wow, you nailed it. Or, gosh, I've never seen it in that way before. I've never thought about it in that way before. And one of the gifts, one of the things I do very well is I can kind of pinpoint often what is holding somebody back, what is keeping somebody stuck in their pattern. And that's also something that we can do on the call. And at the end of the call, if it seems like we're a good fit to work together, we will talk a little bit more about that. And so I invite you to book that call. I'm going to put here in the link, there is the link to book the call if you are interested in that. And if you are watching the replay, the link to book the call will be in the email with the replay as well. All right, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A now, and we will get those answered. But first, I have a big announcement. I have a big announcement for you. I am starting a podcast. I am so excited about this. It is going to be called Binge Breakthrough. And this podcast is going to be available on all the podcast players on November 23rd. This is the day before Thanksgiving. And I am very excited to just share excited to share my experience and to share really the knowledge and the teachings that I have around this. I suffered through this for so long, and as many people as I can help and I can reach with the teachings, the insights, the encouragement, and the support, I am excited about that. So the first 3 episodes will be available on November 23rd, and it's going to be great. I start out talking about the 8 reasons why that keep people that generally are keeping people stuck in the pattern of binging, and then what to do about it. And then I'm going to go much deeper into each of those 8 reasons in a subsequent episode. It's going to be great. It will come out every Wednesday. So be on the lookout for that. I will definitely be letting you know all about it via email. And I hope that you will subscribe and get some great information from that. So that will be coming. All right. Let's see, any questions? Put them in the Q&A. Okay, we have a question here. How can I learn to stop eating at enough? I overeat consistently and I'd like to change that. So what I would do in this case is I would get really curious about how can you get curious about what you learned today about your nervous system? Are there times where you're overeating? Are there connections between when you're overeating and where you are in the state of your nervous system? So if you can identify, oh, you know what? I think I primarily overeat when I'm above home base, when I'm, feeling worry, fear, anxiety, overwhelm, doubt, uncertainty, those types of feelings. Maybe there is a connection. Maybe there's not. Maybe you overeat. You're saying I overeat consistently, but I would first get curious about, do you overeat when you're in home base? Do you primarily overeat when you're above home base or below home base? So that would be a first question to get really curious about, because then you could you could then just start to see, oh, I'm more likely to overeat when I'm in a survival response. So if you don't overeat as much when you're in home base, when you're in that focused, connected place, then that could be something just to get curious about. The other thing that I would get curious about in terms of overeating is, do you know when you reach that enough, you just don't want to? Kind of, some people know when they're at enough, they just don't want to stop. Some people don't really know when they are at enough. There's a lot that I would really want to, that I would kind of get curious about with you. And Jenny, if you want to jump on a food freedom session, we can definitely even talk about this in more detail. And, then I can really ask you some very specific questions, because for each person, and this is what I think is so important, is there are very common reasons why each of us binge, and very common reasons that keep many of us in the pattern of binging. And when the podcast comes out, you will hear the 8 reasons that I see that keep people stuck in the pattern of binging. So there are very common reasons. And we are also all very individual in terms of what is going on for us. So in those 8 reasons, maybe only 2 of them are really going on for you. So if 2 of those 8 things are really going on for you, then that's where we dive in. We dive into those 2 things. You might have something, or maybe you're focusing on just one of those reasons, but the other reasons are, like, one of those reasons being habit. Absolutely, habit is a reason that can keep people binging, but there are 7 other reasons that can keep you binging as well. So if you're only focused on the habit portion and just trying to focus on just only focusing on eating at certain times or in certain amounts, but you're not addressing these other areas, then only focusing on that isn't going to solve your problem. So it needs to be this full kind of like holistic approach where it's really looking at what are all of the areas and what are your very specific areas that you need to work on. There is no one size fits all approach to this. One of the 8 reasons that keep people binging is your nervous system, a dysregulated nervous system. And so what we talked about today is absolutely one of the key things that does keep people binging. So I would love for you to really just take what you learned today, get curious about what state of nervous system you're in. Is there any association between the state of your nervous system and your binging or your overeating? And pick one tool from each above home base and when you're below home base, and just get curious about, okay, the next time I'm able to recognize, oh, I think I'm above home base, can I use one of these tools? Can I try some deep breaths? Can I try grounding myself in some way and see what works for you? I would love to hear about what you discover, what comes up for you, whether you want to send me an email, you can message me on social media. That would be amazing. And I would love to connect with any one of you on a food freedom session. So thanks for joining. Have a great night. Bye.